He hired her to cook for the winter, but her first dish tasted like his dead wife's memory. Some winters don't come to take life, but to make you remember it. Old Silas lived quiet on the edge of Wyoming woods, with a cold stove and a grief that never settled. Then a young woman knocked, asking to cook through the season, but every dish she served carried the scent of someone long buried beneath the frost. Snow fell like sifted flour over Bitter Creek. From his porch, Silas McGraw watched the ridge go white, the day closing as if a curtain had been drawn. The doctor had warned him this winter would be hard on his lung. By noon, the trail up from Dusty Hollow was more rumor than road. Still the buckboard came. The preacher drove, and beside him sat a girl in a faded shawl, a burlap sack at her boots. She climbed down without fuss, leather scuffed, eyes steady as creek ice. "Clara Boone," the preacher said, handing over a folded letter. "She'll cook and keep the fires. West wind set in early. You need help." Silas didn't read the letter. "You ever worked this high?" he asked. "I've worked where a stove smokes and a roof leaks," she said. "I don't talk much, I cook well. I won't let your fire die." The preacher drove off before Silas could refuse. Clara set her sack just inside the door and stood as if listening. The house spoke its old tongue, timbers settling, the clock fighting for the hour. She knelt to the hearth and coaxed the coals like she knew their temper. Silas showed her the root cellar with its tired bins, the shelf where his late wife's spice tins stood, rusted and mute. Words had grown expensive since Martha died. He spent them sparingly. Clara asked only what she had to. "What time do you eat? Where's the well? Do you take sugar?" By dusk the yard lay drifted and trackless, Silas carried in wood. Clara moved with a soft, deliberate step. He told himself he'd hired help because a man does what needs doing. He told himself, too, that a voice under his roof that wasn't the wind might steady the nights. She cooked without commentary. The kitchen filled with ordinary sounds, knife on board, fire shouldering up, a quiet hum that might have been a tune. Silas sat in the chair that fit his back. The lamp turned low. The spare chair kept its place across from him. The smell reached him before the plate did. Meat, browned and sure, a thin brightness under garlic and clove, orange peel if you had lived with a woman who liked to try something once. Clara set the dish before him and poured coffee. He cut a piece because that is what you do when supper is set. He tasted. For a breath his jaw stilled. The flavor rose up complete, exact, as if carried across a winter by something that didn't tire. He saw Martha at the old table laughing when the orange rind slit her thumb, binding it with muslin dipped in gin, saying it tasted better when it cost her something. He had held her. Hand through the meal so she wouldn't fuss at the bandage. His fork clicked against the plate. Clara stood at the stove, back to him. He looked toward the pantry and tried to remember the last time Cloves lived there, or when an orange last came up the trail. He took another bite to prove the first a trick. It wasn't. Outside, the wind worried the chinks. Inside, the clock coughed into the hour. "Good?" Clara asked. "It'll do," he said. He ate until heat returned to his hands, then looked at the empty chair. Clara washed the pan, set it to dry, and banked the fire. "I'll be up before dawn," she said. "Snow likes to lie." After her door closed, Silas stayed with his palms on the wood. He could not name what had happened. He could only feel the outline of it. Some flavors do not lie. They arrive carrying a woman's laugh across a dark season and lay it on a plate. He blew the lamp. In the dark, the air held a thread he hadn't smelled in years. Just a familiar kindness, drifting rooms. He told himself it was stew as he lay down on the far side of the bed, to leave room for what wasn't coming back. But in the last drowse before sleep, with the wind drawing its sleeve along the eaves, he knew what he knew. The first supper the girl cooked tasted exactly like Martha's. the one she made the winter before she died. By the second morning, the snow had crusted into something mean. Silas rose slow, joints stiff as frozen rope, and found the stove already humming, coffee thick in the pot. Clara stood at the window with her hands in her shawl. She didn't turn when he entered. "Storm's holding," she said. "Sky's got that pale look like it don't remember warmth." Breakfast was ready, cornbread with a crust like bark and beans stewed low with salt pork. Simple, hearty, but when Silas bit down, something caught him. It wasn't just the bite of cumin or the sweetness of molasses. It was memory, sharp and undiluted. Martha had made this when the first snow fell. Every year, like clockwork, she'd haul out the old tin of white beans, and that cast-iron skillet nobody else dared touch. She called it her welcome winter supper, made with a hum in her throat and a wood ladle that never left the drawer. Silas had buried that ladle with her. He chewed slower. The taste wasn't close, it was exact. Same balance, same finish, as if the recipe had waited all this time in a pocket of silence and snow. He looked up, but Clara had already cleared her plate and was scrubbing it clean without a word. She worked like she'd always lived there, knew which pan hissed first, which stare groaned loudest. The house, which had stood sullen and still for 4 winters, seemed to move again with her inside it. She didn't fill space, she shifted it gently. That afternoon, while hauling logs in from the lean-to, Silas brushed past the hallway that led to the stairs. He caught it faint, soft and sad, and gone too fast, the smell of lavender and dried sweetgrass. Martha's scent. He stood there, mouth dry. He hadn't kept any of her things with perfume. After the funeral, he'd boxed what little he could bear and burned the rest behind the barn. Yet the smell lingered now, exactly as it had when she used to lean over his shoulder and scold his half-buckled suspenders. He didn't ask Clara. He told himself, smells come and go in old houses. That night, after Clara had gone up, Silas poked through the cupboard for kindling. His hand struck something thin wedged behind a stack of baking tins. He pulled it free. It was a notebook, small, worn at the corners, bound in string. He didn't recognize it until he saw the script on the first page. M. McGraw, recipes and notes. Martha's handwriting, spidery, slanted left. He sat down like the wind had taken his knees. He flipped through it slowly. The recipes were just as she used to mutter them. Measurements written like suggestions with "until it smells right" in the margins. Page after page. Stew with orange peel. Cornbread with burnt honey. Bean soup with bone stock. And the last 2 dishes Clara had cooked were there. Not just similar. Word for word. Silas turned the pages like they might bite. Near the end was a loose scrap folded in half. On it, Martha had scribbled, "For when he's still angry, but hasn't forgotten how to miss me." The stove popped behind him. The wind rattled the eaves again. He sat there for a long time, thumb on the page, eyes not really seeing. Later he knocked once on Clara's door. It opened, and she stood there without surprise. "Where did you get these recipes?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with a calm that didn't waver. "They come to me," she said. "I don't go looking." He wanted to ask more, but something about her voice closed the matter. Not rude, not frightened, just final, like frost on a window you can't see through. "Good night, Mr. McGraw," she added, and shut the door. He stood in the hallway with the book against his chest, unsure whether he felt colder inside or out. By midnight, the lavender smell had crept under the bedroom door. Silas didn't sleep. Not well, anyhow. He watched the dark and tried to tell himself ghosts didn't cook. The storm held them in like a clenched hand. By the 3rd night, even the creek had stopped making noise. Snow packed high against the windows, muting the world. Inside, the fire burned low, the kind of steady heat that spoke of long nights and longer silence. Silas had begun to expect certain things now. Clara up before dawn, the kettle hot before his boots hit the floor, meals that spoke in a language older than words. But what happened that night wasn't like the others. It was near midnight. The house was still. The kind of still that made a man feel like he was the only soul left breathing. Silas lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't hold. His mind wandered. Martha's laugh in summer, the way she used to sit on the porch and snap peas like she was counting the days they had left. Then it came. Soft and faint at first, like it was slipping between the boards. A voice, a song, a lullaby, nearly whispered. He knew the tune. Knew it so well, it tightened his throat. Martha used to sing it only once a year, always in the winter, always when he came back from driving cattle too long, and she wanted to fill the house again. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood, the floor cold beneath his soles. The song carried down from the stairs, not loud, not clear, but steady, a woman's voice, low, strong, and familiar. He crept out to the landing. The kitchen door stood open, firelight flickering against the far wall. But the room was empty. The fire in the stove was dying, embers barely glowing. No pot on, no footsteps, no sign of anyone. Yet the warmth in the air didn't match the dying fire. It was present, like someone had just stepped away. He walked in slow, boots scuffing against the wood. There was something else too, the smell. Faint lavender again, sweetgrass, even lighter. It curled through the room like a memory too gentle to leave. Clara's door was shut. He opened it, half ready to find her missing, but there she was, curled under the quilt, breathing even. Her boots stood by the bed, still damp from snowmelt. The shawl lay folded on the chair. She hadn't gone anywhere. Not tonight. The next morning, Silas came down to find breakfast already on the table. Eggs fried in butter, biscuits still steaming. Clara stood with her back to him, tending the stove. When he cleared his throat, she turned. "You sleep all right?" she asked, casual. "I heard singing," he said. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just said, "This house has good bones. Sometimes it remembers things." "You weren't downstairs?" "No, sir," she said. "You must have dreamed it." There wasn't even a flicker in her voice, but he swore there was something behind her eyes, something that knew too much to say. He sat down and broke the biscuit in half, the butter pooling like gold. He didn't speak again for the rest of breakfast. Clara didn't offer more, and when she turned to the sink, humming just a breath too low to catch the tune, he didn't ask about that either, because he knew that song, knew it in his bones like snow knows the river underneath. And ghosts don't hum unless they've been invited. It started with the woodpile. Silas had been chopping near dusk, the light dying fast, hands slow from the cold. The world felt brittle, like it might crack in half if he swung too hard. He'd set the axe down to brush snow from a stack, when something metal caught his eye. Nestled between two logs, half buried in bark and frost, was a small object glinting faintly in the last of the sun. He reached for it, a hairpin, silver, worn smooth with time and shaped like a feather curling at the tip. He knew it immediately. It was Martha's. He'd laid it in her hands before they closed the lid. Placed it there himself, shaking, remembering how she'd worn it every Sunday to church, and on the day they lost their first baby. He had no doubt, none, that it had gone into the earth with her, and now it was here, in the woodpile. He stared at it a long time, then tucked it in his coat pocket, hand trembling like the air around him. Inside, the house smelled of stew again, rich, heavy with rosemary and wild onion. Clara stood at the stove, ladling it into thick ceramic bowls. The air shimmered with steam, but it was the scent that stopped him. Venison stew with root vegetables, Martha's favorite, not a recipe passed around town. Not even the church ladies knew this one. Martha had made it her way, always. Salted the venison in cider, tossed in orange peel at the end. Silas sat slowly, staring at the bowl, then at Clara. He didn't say Martha's name. He never had. "You get this recipe from that book?" he asked instead. Clara didn't look up, just stirred gently. "No." "Then how?" he asked, voice sharper now. "You guessing? Or is someone whispering 'em to you in your sleep?" She set the ladle down, turned toward him, calm as still water. "She ain't done here," she said. Silas's jaw locked. "Don't play games with me." "I'm not. How would you know what she cooked? What she wore, what she—" "I don't," Clara cut in, "but she does." Silas rose from the table, the chair legs scraping rough against the floor. "Enough. I don't need talk like that in my house. It's not just talk." Clara's voice didn't rise. "She leaves pieces, not for me, for you." He dug into his coat pocket, pulled out the pin, and tossed it on the table. It spun once, then fell still. Silver in the lamplight. "You lose this in the yard, too?" Clara stared at it, then shook her head. "I never touched it." "Then how the hell—" She looked at him, quiet. "You're angry," she said, "but it's not with me." Silas stood breathing hard, the fire popping behind him, stew cooling, untouched. "She's not haunting you," Clara said gently. "She's waiting on you." The words hung between them, warm and terrible. Silas didn't answer. He just turned and walked outside, into the cold. Later that night, when the house was quiet, he couldn't sleep. He wandered downstairs, drawn by the smell of something sweet and cinnamon-rich. In the kitchen, the stove glowed low, casting long shadows. A single candle burned on the windowsill. On the counter sat a pie, still warm, steam curling at the edge. Apple, heavy with spice. Martha's recipe, one she hadn't written down. She'd said it came from her mother and her mother before that. No one else knew how to make it. Beside the pie was a folded note, not yellowed by time, but freshly written in a hand that froze him mid-breath. "Don't ask why I'm here. Just sit and eat. It's cold out there." His hand trembled as he picked it up. The scent of lavender wafted off the paper. He sat down and ate the first full meal since she'd died. The wind had stilled that night, the kind of quiet that presses up against the windows and waits. Silas woke not to sound, but to the absence of it. No whistle through the eaves. No creak from the beams. Just a kind of hush that made his ears ring. He sat up in bed and stared at the darkness, heavy and full around him. Something tugged inside, old and uneasy. He slipped on his boots, not bothering to lace them. The floorboards didn't groan beneath him. Even the stairs gave no protest. Downstairs the fire was out, the coals cold, not a flicker in the house. And then he heard it, his name, software drawn out. "Silas." He turned sharply. The voice hadn't come from inside. It had come from the porch. Outside. And it wasn't Clara's. No, he'd have known if it was. This voice, it bent time, made the years collapse in his chest. He pulled on his coat and opened the door. The world outside was silver and still. Moonlight painted everything in cold light. Snow stretched clean and unbroken, except for the tracks. Bare feet, a single line of small, delicate footprints led away from the porch steps into the woods. But beside them, almost hidden, ran another trail, smaller, childlike. Silas froze. The air bit deep into his lungs. His fingers went numb, but not from the cold. He stepped down and followed. The snow swallowed his footsteps behind him. The prints ahead never wavered, not once. No signs of stumbling, just steady walking, like they knew where they were going. He passed the edge of the property, into the trees. They rustled faintly, though there was No wind. Then nothing. The footprints vanished, just stopped mid-snow where no shelter stood, no sign of struggle, just empty white silence. And then something behind him shifted. He turned. Clara stood at the tree line, arms crossed over her coatless chest, face pale as the moon. No scarf, no boots. She didn't shiver. "I told you," she said. "I wasn't out here." He stared at her. "Then who—" Clara walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, her feet not matching any of the prints. "But someone was," she said, and her voice sounded older than she looked. "Someone who's not ready to leave. Not yet." "You're talking nonsense." "I'm talking what's here." She stopped just beside him. Her breath didn't mist in the cold. "You've been listening, Silas, but not hearing. There's a difference." "Why those prints?" "Who—" Clara turned and looked at the spot where the child's trail had ended. "She's not alone," she whispered. "She never was." That night, Silas sat up in his old armchair until dawn, watching the fire he'd finally relit. He didn't sleep. He didn't even blink much, and when he finally stood to go back upstairs, he saw it. 2 cups on the table, one large, one small, both steaming. He hadn't put them there, and he wasn't thirsty. The morning broke pale and sharp, light catching on every edge of frost outside the cabin windows. Inside, the stove was warm, the kettle gently hissing. Silas sat in silence at the table, hands cupped around a mug of coffee he hadn't made. It was Martha's mug, white porcelain with a green rim, and a small letter M carved faintly into the handle, etched there by his own pocket knife as a gift on their 10th Christmas together. He'd hurled it into the creek behind the house the day they buried her, watched it break against the rock, watched it sink. Now it sat before him, filled, steaming, untouched. He didn't speak when Clara entered the room, still tying her apron. "You find that in the cupboard?" he asked without looking at her. "No," she said. "It was there when I came down." Silas turned the mug slowly as though expecting the porcelain to flinch. "You know what this is?" "I do now," she answered. "It's not mine." "Sure as hell ain't mine anymore." Clara set a spoon down, the soft clink of it touching metal, a strange comfort in the hush. "It's not here to hurt you." "That's not the point." His voice cracked, something brittle beneath it. "It ain't supposed to be here." Clara looked at him, eyes too knowing for a girl that young. "Maybe it never left." He didn't respond, just pushed back from the table and walked to the window, squinting toward the creek bed that now slept beneath snow. "I saw it break," he muttered. I watched it fall." Clara poured coffee into her own cup, sat down, and said nothing. A long silence settled between them. Then she spoke, voice low and slow. "There's a door, Mr. McGraw." He turned. "A door you opened," she continued. "Maybe not with your hands, maybe not with your heart, but with your hunger." "What the hell does that mean?" "You want her back, enough to feed the memory." Silas blinked at her, face tightening. "You think I asked for this, for mugs and pies and voices in the trees?" "I think you miss her so much," Clara said. "You're keeping her here without knowing it." He stared, and in his chest something stung sharp and deep. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Instead, he walked to the hearth, picked up a dishcloth to wipe the table clean, and stopped. There, under Clara's bowl, was a napkin, not linen, not cotton, paper, faded and lined, and written in Martha's looping hand, "Let me go, love, but eat well." He stepped back, heart pounding. The air thinned. Clara stood too, gently taking the paper from his hand. "She's not angry. She always did leave notes when I forgot to eat," he muttered almost to himself. "She still does." Silas sat back down slowly. The cabin seemed smaller now, but not empty. There were things here, left behind, carried forward, still warm. He looked at Clara, unsure. She only nodded toward his plate. "You'll need your strength for tonight." "Why?" Her voice softened. "Because the woods don't stay quiet forever." And outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the trees, carrying with it the scent of cinnamon and cinders. The wind howled harder that night, as if something old was stretching its limbs after a long sleep. Silas stayed by the fire, boots on, coat hung over the chair just in case. He told himself he wouldn't doze off, but around midnight the cabin went still. No creaks, no whistles, just silence. The same awful kind that had come before, and he noticed the front door wasn't latched. He stood, grabbed his coat, and opened it. Snowflakes floated down in slow spirals. The world outside was hushed and heavy, the kind of night where sound had no place. He stepped out onto the porch and saw Clara's bare footprints, leading away from the steps. No boots, no shawl, just her little tracks heading into the woods. He didn't call after her, didn't ask why. He just followed. The snow swallowed his steps again. His lungs burned from the cold, but he didn't slow. The trees closed in around him, black bones against the dim sky. And then he saw it. A light, hung still in the forest like a lantern, glowing without flicker. It wasn't a fire, not a torch. It hovered like a dream caught in branches, and Clara walked straight toward it. She never turned back. Silas picked up his pace, stumbling through the drifts. The light shimmered ahead, neither close nor far, like it waited on its own terms. Then, just as he stepped into a clearing, it vanished. Gone. And so was Clara. His breath heaved in the cold. "Clara!" he called, the name falling flat against the trees. No answer, but something else reached him, a sound, software familiar, the slow stir of a spoon against a pot. Clink, swirl, pause. It came from deeper in the trees. His feet moved without his say-so, drawn to it, and there, tucked beneath tall pines where snow didn't reach, stood a cabin he'd never seen. Old, leaning, but with smoke rising from the chimney like any living home. He stepped closer, heart thudding. Through the frosted window he saw a woman standing at the stove, ladle in hand, back turned. Her frame was familiar, her motions more so. The way she stirred, how she tilted her head slightly when tasting. "Martha," he breathed. He raised a hand to knock, but before his knuckles touched wood, the door opened on its own. And there she was, a woman who looked like Martha, but younger. Not in body, but in the way light touched her eyes. Her hair was pinned the way Martha used to wear it on Sundays. She wore the apron Silas had sewn her from old flour sacks. She held the wooden spoon he'd carved the day they moved into the homestead. But her gaze, something in it, was distant, unfamiliar. She smiled. "You came?" Silas swallowed hard. I didn't know where else to go." The woman nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The warmth hit him like a memory, thick with spices and ash. She ladled stew into a bowl, placed it on the table without a word. He sat, hands trembling, stared down at the steam curling up. "Where's Clara?" he asked. The woman turned her, back to him again. "She's not yours to find." Silas blinked. "What does that mean?" "She came because something in you called out," she said. "But she's not the answer, just the path." He looked around the cabin. Everything inside echoed what he and Martha had once built. The cracked enamel pan, the chipped mug, the stack of letters tied with twine. But none of it was quite right. "I don't understand," he whispered. The woman turned, gaze steady now. "You came looking for a ghost, but you'll find only what you're ready to let go." She walked to the door, opened it. Wind rushed in, and with it, the scent of OOA, Huang, and ash, Martha's scent. But softer, distant. Silas stood. "Is this goodbye?" She didn't answer, just smiled, a smile like the first day they met, like the last morning they danced in the kitchen. Then the door closed gently between them. He woke in his own bed, sweat on his neck, snow melting on his boots by the door, and on the kitchen table, laid out like a memory made real, a birthday meal, exactly the way Martha had made it each January 7th, every spice, every fold in the napkin. But it wasn't January, and Martha was long gone. The scent hit him first. Honey ham, cornbread fresh from a cast-iron skillet, and candied apples dusted with cinnamon. Silas stood still as a stone in the doorway, heart caught between beats. On the table sat a birthday meal too perfect to be memory. Martha had only made it 3 times during their marriage. The last time she was too weak to stand. He'd fed her the apples with a spoon, 1 bite at a time, and they hadn't spoken a word. Now the apples glistened, warm, alive. He approached, slow fingers grazing the napkin. It was embroidered with blue thread, just like Martha used to do. The stitch at the corner, crooked and shy, belonged to her hand. He dropped into the chair and stared. A breeze stirred behind him, and he half expected her to brush past. But it was Clara who stepped out of the hallway, cheeks pale, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "You made this?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "Then who?" She didn't speak, just walked to the stove and stirred something gentle in a pot that hadn't been there moments before. He watched her, noticed her hands weren't steady. Not quite. "You all right?" he asked. Clara nodded but didn't turn. "It's harder the more open the door gets." He frowned. "What door?" "You keep saying—" "The one you opened when you remembered her," Clara said. "When you really remembered her. Not just the grief. The details." Silas looked back at the food. "I never forgot." "You did?" Clara said softly. "Not on purpose, but grief dims things, makes them blur so we can live." He didn't know what to say, so she said it for him. "She's not trapped, but she's waiting." Silas's throat went tight. "Waiting for what?" "For you to stop calling her back with your hunger." He stood up, voice sharp. "I didn't call her." Clara turned to him now. "You did. Every time you sat in silence and ached. Every time you touched her things and wished for warmth without letting go of pain. She came back in pieces through the food, the smells, the songs." Silas turned away. The stove flickered. The wind outside had stilled, as if the house itself were holding breath. "I just wanted to eat a meal without choking on the past," he whispered. "Then eat this one," Clara said. "But no, it's the last time it comes from her." He sat again, picked up the fork, took a bite of the ham, the salt, the glaze, the clove hidden in the edge like she always used to do. A tear slid down his cheek without asking permission. "She taught me," Clara said suddenly, "not in words, but in quiet." Silas looked up. Clara stared into the fire, eyes wet. "I didn't know what to do when I got here. I didn't even know how to boil an egg right. But one night I felt her hand guide mine on the wooden spoon." Silas let that settle. The quiet became thick again. "You afraid?" he asked finally. Clara nodded. "But not of her. Just of staying. Too long. Of becoming part of something I don't belong to." He watched her closely. "You think she's keeping you?" "Number I think you are," Clara replied. "And she's just helping me stay because she knows you're not ready." Silas exhaled slow. Then he reached for his second bite. "Then maybe we both need to learn how to say goodbye." Clara smiled gently. "That's what this kitchen is for." The candles flickered, the food cooled, but the weight in the air began to lift, inch by inch. And for the first time since Martha died, Silas didn't feel the cold creeping in from the walls. He just felt full. The snow fell light that week, soft as sifted flour. The wind died down, the kind of calm that settles after a storm's broken something loose. Silas didn't speak of the meal again. Neither did Clara. but something had shifted in the air between them. He'd catch her humming while peeling carrots, a tune that wasn't Martha's but carried the same softness. And sometimes he'd forget where he was for half a breath, thinking it was years ago, thinking Martha was just in the other room, folding linens or steeping her tea. But when he turned, it was always Clara. Smaller, steadier, still a mystery wrapped in silence. And yet, the house began to feel less haunted. Not because the presence was gone, but because it no longer weighed on him like it used to. One morning he found fresh bread on the windowsill. He hadn't baked it. Nor had Clara. It was the sourdough kind Martha used to make, back before the war took his left leg's strength and the long winters dulled her appetite. The crust had that crackly skin, the inside warm, alive. Clara simply said, "Some things find their way back before they leave." That night he heard footsteps in the hall, slow, measured, but he didn't rise to check. He just listened, hand on his chest, letting it pass through him. The next day, the photo of their wedding appeared on Clara's bedside table. He found it while checking on the firewood. The same sepia frame, the same fold at the corner from when it once fell behind the dresser in '84. Martha's eyes looking straight at him. Only now there was something written on the back, in her handwriting. "You haven't let go." So I stayed. He brought the frame to Clara. She looked at it a long while, then said, "She's not angry, but she's tired." Silas looked around the kitchen. The walls no longer felt like stone, more like earth, ready for something to grow. "She's still cooking," he said quietly. Clara nodded. "Until you're fed." That evening, without meaning to, he dozed off in the rocking chair by the fire. When he woke, the kitchen was lit, but empty, and on the table sat a plate he hadn't seen in decades, a slice of first snow pie, as Martha used to call it, pecans, molasses, and the lightest touch of nutmeg. The flavor hit like the first kiss she gave him behind the grain silo. He didn't cry, just closed his eyes and said aloud, "Thank you." The next morning he packed away her last shawl, folded it slow with both hands, set it in the trunk at the foot of the bed. But he didn't close the lid. Not yet. It was Clara who rose before first light that morning. Silas found her standing by the window, already dressed, her boots muddy and skirt damp as if she'd been walking the woods. The sky outside was that soft gray before snow, but her cheeks were bright, like she'd seen something that brought color back to her. "I need to show you something," she said. He didn't ask, just pulled on his coat, lit the lantern, and followed. They walked without words through the orchard behind the house, the old one Silas had let go wild years ago. The trees, once thick with fruit, were gnarled and bare now. A few broken limbs hung low, covered in frost. He hadn't stepped foot there since the spring Martha passed. Clara stopped beside a crooked apple tree near the fence line. Beneath it, the ground had been dug up in a shallow ring. She bent down and pulled something from the loose dirt, a shard of porcelain, white with a painted blue flower curling across one side. Silas stared at it, not breathing. "That's from Martha's wedding china," he said. "She buried a piece after the diagnosis. Said if the land remembered their beginning, it wouldn't be the end." Clara brushed it clean and handed it to him. "She told me to find it." He looked at her sharply. "Told you?" Clara's voice softened, almost like wind in the brush. "Not in words, just in knowing, like how you hear a melody in your chest before the notes catch up." He stood there, turning the fragment in his fingers. "She wanted this land to hold her love, not her pain," Clara whispered. Silas knelt. The cold stung his knees, but he didn't care. He pressed the shard into the dirt again, this time deeper, as if returning it. "I used to think I was protecting her memory by keeping everything frozen," he said. but maybe I was just holding her here. Clara nodded. Sometimes grief grows roots where love was meant to bloom. Back at the house, Clara went to the kitchen, silent as always, but something in her was different. She moved freer, as if something inside her had been released too. That night, she cooked a meal Silas didn't recognize. A stew with sage and dried tomatoes, something tart and peppered with fire. It wasn't Martha's, it was Clara's. He took a bite, expecting to brace against it, but it settled warm in his chest, like a hearth catching flame. "You're not cooking for her anymore," he said. "No," Clara replied. "Tonight's for me." He set down his spoon. "And what's in it?" Clara smiled. "A little salt, a little spite, and hope." He laughed, a short, real laugh that cracked something open. She leaned back, watching him. "Tonight's the night," she said. "You'll see her again." Silas swallowed. The house was quiet, the walls listening. And after that, Clara didn't answer, but the kettle on the stove began to whistle low. The wind picked up through the chimney, curling soft through the cracks. He understood. Tonight wasn't about holding on. It was about letting go. The wind outside had settled into a hush again, a silence that felt like breath being held. Silas couldn't eat more than a few spoonfuls of Clara's stew, though it tasted like it had been simmered with care and quiet forgiveness. His hands trembled when he set the bowl down. "I need to sit by the fire," he said, though what he really meant was, "I need to wait." Clara nodded. She didn't offer to join him. He settled into the old rocker, the one Martha had stitched a cushion for decades ago. The fire crackled low, casting gold onto the stone hearth and the worn boots beside it. Shadows danced, slow and steady. Time drifted. The walls seemed to pulse gently with the heat. And then it came. A smell. Martha's gingerbread. He could taste the molasses in the back of his throat before he even stood. He rose slowly, every joint aching in a way that felt expectant. In the kitchen, the air was warm and rich, ginger, clove, cinnamon. And on the stovetop sat a pan, one he hadn't seen in years, lined with cookies shaped like stars. Clara wasn't there, but someone was. She didn't knock, didn't open the door like a visitor. She just appeared, as if she'd stepped out from between the floorboards and moonlight. Martha. Not the Martha of his final memories, not the pale hands, the dim eyes. This was her from long ago. Dark hair loose, cheeks flushed from laughter or work, the red scarf she used to wear in the orchard tied gently at her throat. Her presence wasn't heavy or haunting, it was quiet, gentle. Silas didn't speak right away, he just stared, mouth slightly open, heart pounding with something that wasn't fear. "I didn't mean to keep you," he said finally, voice thick. "I just didn't know how to let you go." Martha's eyes softened. She stepped closer. He reached for her, but not with desperation, just longing. His hand touched her cheek. She wasn't cold, she wasn't warm, she just was. His throat tightened. "You should have told me it was okay." "I tried," she said softly, though her lips didn't move. "You kept feeding the sorrow. You stopped living." He nodded. "I know." Tears filled his eyes, but none fell. "I was angry," he whispered. "I didn't know where to put it all." "You did," she said. "You just forgot." Her fingers brushed his chest over the heart that hadn't stopped aching since the morning he buried her. "I never needed you to stop loving me," she said, "just to let the love find a new shape." Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, she was fading. He didn't reach to pull her back. Instead, he whispered, "Say, thank you." And then she was gone. No noise, no spark, just the scent of gingerbread lingering. He stood alone in the kitchen, but for the first time in 4 years, he didn't feel alone. Behind him, Clara's footsteps padded in. She stopped at the threshold, saw the empty pan, saw the way his shoulders sat lower, looser. "She came?" she asked. Silas nodded. "She stayed just long enough." Clara stepped forward and gently touched his arm. "Then she can rest." He looked at her, really looked. The girl who came with nothing but potatoes and a second-hand coat. The woman who'd brought a ghost to peace and a man back to himself. "I'm ready," he said. "Good," Clara said, "because there's still spring coming." For 2 days Clara slept like someone who'd walked home from the end of the world. Silas let her be. He stacked wood, boiled tea, fed the hens without a word. The house was quiet, not haunted, not heavy, just resting. On the 3rd morning she rose, eyes clear, skin pale but calm, like whatever had been twisting inside her had finally unwound. "Coffee?" she asked. Silas nodded. "And toast if you've the strength." She smiled. "I got more than that." And she did. That morning Clara opened the cabinet where Martha's recipes once lived and pulled out a blank notepad. Not the brown, brittle pages of memory, but something new. Fresh. Clean. She stood at the counter, grinding dried rosemary, slicing shallots, whisking eggs with a twist of lemon and wild honey. Silas didn't ask what she was making. He just sat and watched the way her sleeves rolled up, the way her hands moved like music. The smell that filled the room was nothing he'd known before. Not Martha's chicken stew or Sunday biscuits or winter preserves. This was Clara's scent, bold, warm, bright at the edges. She set the bowl before him without ceremony. He took one bite, paused, then another. By the 3rd spoonful, his chest was hot, not from spice, but from a kind of quiet awe. He looked up. "You been holding out on me?" Clara chuckled just once. "Didn't feel right until now." He nodded, swallowed, and cleared his throat. "It's good." "Not hers," Clara said gently. "No," he agreed, sallow away. "But that's not what I need anymore." Silas finished every drop. He leaned back, belly full, heart strangely light. The window let in a shaft of gold, the kind that only came when winter loosened its grip. They walked out together later that day, down to the edge of the orchard. Clara carried a small trowel and a cloth bundle. Silas carried the shard, the same piece of Martha's wedding china. In the thawing earth, beneath a burst of purple crocus, they buried it. Together, no prayer, no speech. Just a soft pat of soil, and a moment. Nothing grew on that patch of ground that spring, or the next, but they left it empty on purpose. A small square of stillness, a reminder that not everything had to be filled, that some spaces were meant to stay open. "Like a page," Clara said once, touching the spot with bare fingers. "Still waiting to be written." They didn't mark it, didn't fence it, didn't speak of it much again. But every time Silas passed it, on his way to the chicken coop or the fence posts that always needed mending, he'd nod just a little and keep walking, because life was moving again, and so was he. Come summer, Clara planted a row of green beans under the kitchen window, said it helped the light feel earned. Silas built her a raised bed for tomatoes, though his knees weren't what they used to be. Together they cleared the old corner by the barn, coaxed strawberries out of dirt that hadn't seen sweetness in years. They didn't speak much while they worked, just nodded, passed tools, poured cold water, and let the soil carry what words couldn't. One evening after a trip down to the well, Clara paused at the front porch. "You ever been back to town?" she asked. Silas shook his head. "No reason." She gave him a look that said, "That's not the same as no need." The next week she brushed out her hair, wore a dress that didn't smell like smoke or onions. Silas put on the old vest Martha once mended, though he didn't say so aloud. They hitched the wagon and made their way to Dusty Hollow. The town hadn't changed much, just sun-warped wood, rusted hinges, folks talking weather like it was a wild dog. But the looks were different this time, long, curious. "Thought you'd up and died," Barkeep said. "Almost," Silas replied. "Didn't take. Clara smiled quietly behind him. At the dry goods store, the widow Baines touched Clara's sleeve and asked, "You're living with him?" Clara just said, "We keep each other fed." It was enough. By fall, word got around that Silas McGraw's cabin had light again, that folks heard music some nights or laughter in the early dawn. Then came the visitors. First was a woman named Luann from the church, widowed 2 winters now, her boy in tow. She'd heard there might be room for someone needing warmth and work. Clara said yes before Silas could blink. Then came Cook, an old river sailor with lungs full of gravel and stories that made no sense until the 3rd retelling. He offered to mend the roof in exchange for stew and silence. Silas said, "You snore, I shoot." Cook replied, "I cough louder," and so the house filled. Clara's table stretched, her recipes changed. Silas carved new chairs. The stove stayed lit more often than not. Still, some nights when the wind brushed the windows just so, Clara would slip 1 spice too many into the soup, or Silas would hum a song without knowing why, and the whole room would go quiet for half a breath. Not sad, just remembering, and then someone would laugh, or sneeze, or drop a fork, and the moment would pass like a shadow at noon. They were building something, not a family, not exactly, but something that felt like it. "I never thought I'd live with strangers," Silas muttered one night, watching Cook teach the boy how to whittle. "You're not," Clara said. He looked at her. "Not anymore." She squeezed his shoulder. He let her. That winter the house didn't feel cold even when the fire dipped, because there were boots by the door that weren't his, because someone always stirred the pot, because chairs scraped against the floor at every meal. Because she had gone, and they had stayed. Winter came slow that year, like an old friend who didn't want to interrupt. The first snow fell light, barely clinging to the fence posts. But it was enough to paint the orchard white, enough to hush the creek behind the barn. Silas stood beside Clara at the edge of the apple trees. His breath made soft clouds in the morning air. She wore his old scarf, wrapped twice around her neck. He hadn't asked for it back. The crocus patch, the one where they buried the shard, lay untouched. No tracks, no weeds, just a clean, blank spot of earth, like it had made peace with what it held. "She never wanted me to be alone," Silas said quietly. Clara nodded. "You weren't." He turned to her, something in his eyes unspoken but full. Even when the house was empty, she didn't flinch, especially then. Behind them, a kettle whistled from the open window. A boy's voice shouted something about burning biscuits. Luann laughed. Cook coughed and cursed and stumped across the floorboards. And Clara smiled. Silas took one last look at the trees, bare, strong, waiting, and turned back toward the house. He didn't limp as much these days. The porch groaned under the weight of new boots, new lives. The front door was cracked open, warm air spilling out like a welcome. Clara reached it first, hand on the frame. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with voices and steam. The long table was set, not fancy but full. Bowls of roasted squash, fried salt pork, cornbread still steaming. At the center, a pie Silas didn't recognize. He pointed. "Yours?" he asked. Clara shrugged. "Cook's recipe. I just made it make sense." Silas grinned. "Bet it still tastes like trouble." They sat, not across from each other but side by side. As everyone gathered, Luann and her boy, Cook humming a sea tune, the wind rattling the panes but not getting in, Clara reached for Silas's hand beneath the table. He let her hold it, not because he needed the touch, but because it reminded him of something true, that even in the quietest winters, even when grief laid thick on the roof like snow, you could still build something warm inside, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it and live. When the first bite was taken and the first joke cracked, and the first clatter of silverware filled the room like music. Silas looked around one more time and thought, Martha would have liked this. Then he picked up his fork and ate. If this story stirred something in you, drop a simple 1 in the comments just to say, I felt that too. And if you'd like to hear more tales like this of quiet love, old ghosts, and kitchens that remember, go ahead and hit subscribe. There's always another fire waiting to be lit.